It's not surprising to me that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had to downgrade Archwell Foundation to fiscal sponsorship and rebrand to Archwell Philanthropies. Pretty much all their aspirations post-Megxit have had to be downgraded or failed or were abandoned. It's that the direction that they've decided to go is almost as ill-advised or stupid as their initial out-of-touch concept. Late in 2025, the Sussexes tried to frame the failing of Archwell Foundation and its downgrade to fiscal sponsorship as a rebrand to Archwell Philanthropies, intended to preserve a future structure for their children. And we have an entire video debunking that spin in the media and explaining the reality of the situation. I will try to link it for you here. In short, the real reason why they downgraded and renamed it has everything to do with the cost, complexity, and lack of growth in running a foundation. Archwell wasn't big enough or wealthy enough to sustain a true foundation format and keep it compliant. Now, in 2026, we've seen a new structure developing for Archwell. For Prince Harry, and for Meghan Markle, and it's exposing major changes behind the scenes and is more telling of the financial situation than you might assume. Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelly. Welcome back to another video. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to subscribe, click the like, hype button, and leave me a comment down below. First, it was Jordan, which was hosted by the WHO, meaning the Sussexes were not only guests of WHO rather than the government of Jordan, but they didn't have any control or say over the visit. It was really no different than a standard celebrity or athlete taking on an ambassadorship, which is really quite common with WHO and other organizations. This marked the first time we saw Harry and Meghan operating under the supervision and structure of an external organization or institution. The last time we saw this was when they were with the royal family. And you'll remember, the Sussexes made clear one of their main complaints while with the royal family was that they weren't in control specifically. Despite all the privilege and purpose of their role, the work alone wasn't enough to outweigh their desire for curated publicity and freedom to accept freebies or conduct personal interviews. Contrary to their latest spin that they left because of the people, not the work, the truth of the matter is that Harry and Meghan very much made clear the work was not enough to keep them there. In fact, they took issue with not getting paid and not having more control and say over the work that they did. So with Jordan, instead, we saw them retreating. Their independent foundation and publicized vacations before 2025 failed. Very clearly that model failed and was deemed not sustainable. It failed to produce profit out of thin air, big surprise. It failed to lure in sponsorships from larger, more established foundations or governments to, pay or foot the bill for Harry and Meghan to do these types of trips the way they experienced with the royal family. Someone else paid for everything, they just had to go. They wanted to recreate that, but be able to pick and choose and have a little more say and control, so they tried to sell that model via Nigeria and Colombia. And it also failed to propel them into faux royal status in the public view. They were still disliked, still criticized, and their popularity plummeted. Now that they've seen the reality of how that turned out and the reality of the expense of those endeavors coming at them post-downgrade, they're retreating back into working under an institution when they went to Jordan. This is the ambassadorship model. Thus far, about 50% of this Archwell Philanthropies' new debut in 2026, one in which they are sacrificing control in order to maintain the appearance of important, faux diplomatic image and humanitarian reputations. And now we see the other 50%, the second version of this reduced capacity that they are now operating in as a fiscal sponsor, Archwell Philanthropies. And this one is a hybrid model. One where they ease the cost of a trip and maximize publicity potential by mixing for-profit gigs with not-for-profit visits framed as awareness value. This has led to obvious conflict of interest questions, while the dichotomy of their intentions proved to only increase scrutiny and backlash over things like taxpayer expenses for police work. The problems Harry and Meghan face are almost always tied directly back to their conflicted public identity. They want to use their titles and be treated similarly to the royal family, including when it comes to security, but they also want to do for-profit activities, self-elevating personal branding in public view, and have a celebrity lifestyle. These interests have always had a natural incompatibility, but now they're packaging that conflict into a trip. The reason is likely necessity, as we discussed in the last video. This is a signal, a strong signal, that they cannot afford to fund an exclusively not-for-profit trip on their own any longer. Which leads us to question whether or not Archwell can truly survive. And if so, is this really the dire state of things now? Reduced to ambassadorship and hybrid models exclusively? It's not surprising, but it is significant. So let's examine this a little more closely. Part of the problem is their illusion that they could develop their very own independent faux royal model via Archwell post-Megxit. This concept, this fever dream, was always doomed. I can't imagine how they thought it would actually work out. It doesn't really make sense. I can't imagine they're that. I guess I can. They must be that out of touch and lack the critical thinking required. But specifically in this context of publicized vacations modeled after royal tours versus the real deal that the royal family brings to the table, is that unlike working members of the royal family, Harry and Meghan do not represent the British government or the Australian state or any government at all. Royal visits are often tied to diplomacy and the state-funded sovereign grant with established charitable patrons that receive long-term institutional support. There are tangible contributions. While the royal family manages large-scale philanthropic funds, Harry and Meghan's current impact is primarily measured in awareness alone, rather than direct financial injections. For example, their visit to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne involved personal interactions, gardening, and selfies, but no major donation has been announced. Proponents argue that their global fame brings a level of media attention to local causes, like Invictus Australia or women's shelters, that these organizations might not otherwise receive such exposure if it weren't for Harry and Meghan coming by. But there are plot holes with that theory. Given that the Sussexes are really, at this juncture, only able to provide awareness impact due to their unlikability and their lack of popularity and their waning cultural influence, let's be honest, people are getting bored with Harry and Meghan and their drama and their nonsense and their self-entitled horse hockey. The diminishing public interest exposes the true value behind awareness visits being very minimal. They can't stimulate that big of an impact by just providing awareness and media exposure. At least not anymore. Measuring the actual impact of awareness is a point of heavy debate, to be fair. Critics argue that awareness is an intangible metric used to justify self-promotion. Nonprofits and experts, however, identify several concrete benefits that a high-profile visit can provide, even without an immediate cash donation. So let's look at the evidence both for and against this. The tangible benefits of awareness can be fundraising acceleration. Behavioral Insights team suggests by their research that celebrity visits often make donations happen faster and earlier in a campaign by creating a sense of urgency. Credibility and social proof is another element here. For smaller organizations, A visit from a global figure acts as a seal of approval and can help legitimize a charity or an organization. It can help the charity attract new corporate partners or major donors who previously overlooked them. It can also aid in volunteer recruitment in theory. Media coverage of a celebrity serving lunch at a shelter might lead to a surge in local volunteer signups or even physical donations of food or clothing, as the organization's mission can reach people who were unaware of its existence or got inspired to help. There's also the factor of resource reallocation. If a visit secures massive media reach for free, a nonprofit can reallocate its marketing budget directly into its service missions, like veteran housing or shelter beds, instead of spending it on public relations and media exposure. However, the biggest plot hole with these benefits is the likability and relatability of the celebrity specifically. If you have a movie star or an athlete who has been in the press a lot and people are excited about them and people have been following them a lot, or they have a huge social media following, these types of people can really command a lot more attention. And because they're well liked, they can more directly inspire people to contribute or help or get involved. However, when you have polarizing or unlikable celebrities or public figures like Meghan and Harry, then these benefits are grossly diminished. And the halo effect doesn't really save them here either. When it comes to evidence against this model, even despite the potential benefits that may sneak by, many people argue that the impact is so temporary and lacking the weight of an institutional royal support, it really doesn't add up to much. Experts note that many celebrity visits are ad hoc and lack the long-term commitment that working royals provide through lifelong patronages and stewardship over years. One-off visits have a lot less impact than long-standing relationships with a celebrity, where their public brand and public persona can be tied to that charity or organization over the long term and provide aid for many years. A lot of athletes do this. They partner up with a handful of charities or one or two really important charities. A lot of athletes do, like the Big Brothers and Big Sisters programs here. They stick with it for years and years and years, and that relationship inspires people. It builds trust. It's a lot different. And the royal family with their patronages, they build trust and relationships over the long term, and they help solve problems as they come. They're not one-off events with no history, trust, or reason behind them. A lot of Meghan and Harry's Australia charitable awareness visits have very little connection. There's not a lot to it that makes sense of like, well, why did she pick that? Or why is that on the agenda exactly? What's the connection here? Which leads me to the next point of public skepticism. A survey by Third Sector found that 69% of people are neither more nor less likely to donate to a charity or volunteer or get involved just because a celebrity backs it, suggesting that the awareness benefit might be much smaller than claimed, but also I think I infer this data as there is a change and a shift happening. Since social media and so much more like exposure and reality has set in around celebrities and disparities are more glaring, now people are not so enamored by a celebrity getting involved. It's more like, yeah, they should be involved. They should be donating. They should be trying to help people because they are privileged. It doesn't necessarily inspire people who are also struggling and dealing with the day-to-day stress and have zero time because they're juggling multiple jobs or things of that nature to go forth and help or volunteer or donate just because a celebrity is involved. Instead, the perspective of like my generation and the younger generations is that is the point. If you are lucky enough to be wealthy or famous or a celebrity or a known figure or an ex-royal like Harry and Meghan, then you darn well should be spreading around donations and volunteering and trying to help people because of that privilege. Don't do nothing to try to inspire people who don't have as much to give, whether it be time or money, to do it for you. You go and do it. That's the point. That is what you should be doing. That's the popular belief that is shifting in, and that percentage at 69, I see an upward trend coming forth. A celebrity involvement is not enough any longer. There is also the commercial overlap that clouds the dynamic a lot. In the Sussexes case, the impact of their philanthropic work is often overshadowed by the commercial nature of the trip. For instance, while Meghan visited a shelter, she also spent time on private business meetings for her lifestyle brand As Ever and filmed a guest spot on MasterChef, leading to claims that the charities are being used simply to soften the image of a for-profit trip. So what we have seen in 2026, their first year as, and really, quite frankly, their first months and weeks as Archwell Philanthropies under fiscal sponsorship from their downgrade from Archwell Foundation, we have seen this pattern emerge of two fresh models to continuing their humanitarian image, and that is the hybrid model and the ambassadorship model, neither of which are perfect, and both of which have their own set of problems. But let's take a moment to go back to how this all started and their insane ideas that they could springboard Nigeria and Colombia into some sort of sustained faux royal lifestyle. Let's just break this down real quick because it is wild, the delusions that these two had. It's as if they have no idea how any of this works. Harry, I truly believe he has very little idea how most of these types of things work because, he was raised in a bubble. He had everything sort of laid out for him, and he never had to figure out any of this or think about any of this. And his public image was very, very successfully managed by a very skilled PR team. It wasn't until he started pushing to control his own media relations that everybody realized how terrible he is. And Meghan, I think everybody has the consensus that her narcissism blinds her to the reality of things. But the 2024 trips to Nigeria and Colombia were the Sussexes' blueprint, so to speak, for a new model of international engagement that was modeled after the royal family, but was an attempt to afford them the control that they wanted. Although their team, technically framed these as philanthropic invitations, the structure of the visits were so closely mirroring official royal tours, which led to significant debate about whether this is appropriate. However, one thing is clear. They were intended to springboard a more regular, sponsored travel schedule. And there are several factors that provide evidence of this springboard strategy, that these trips were prototypes for a recurring model. Firstly, the sequential timing. The rapid succession of tours, Nigeria in May 2024 and Colombia in August 2024, with subsequent trips like Jordan in early 2026, indicated a shift toward more regular international travel schedules. Also, the standardized royal format. Both trips included the trappings of official visits, heavy government-backed security, meetings with high-level officials, like the Vice President of Colombia, and highly controlled media access with the couple's own photographers. There was intentional publicity. Harry explicitly stated in 2024 that we look forward to traveling more, noting that there will always be reasons to meet the people at the heart of our work. How laughable was that? Additionally, there was brand alignment. The tours served as a platform to make Archwell's brand look like it had clear core pillars, like the Invictus Games, or digital safety, or women's rights, while maintaining their global visibility and celebrity royal status. These images were essentially a marketing campaign. The nature of the sponsorship of these trips remains a point of contention. These visits were official only in the sense that they were invited by host governments, like Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff and Colombia's Vice President. Not the top tier, but someone who often provided substantial logistical and security support. There's questionable funding behind these trips. While the Colombian government initially claimed the Sussexes financed their own trip, subsequent reports and books like Tom Bower's Betrayal have alleged significant external funding from private donors. There was this strategic expansion as well. In 2025, at the time, Archwell Foundation transitioned late in the year to fiscal sponsorship model under Global Impact and became Archwell Philanthropies. This move may insulate the couple from the direct financial liability of these types of trips while providing a more professionalized structure for international accountability visits and giving them the legal framework and expertise to ensure that they aren't breaking any rules. However, there's a lot of counter evidence here and challenges. For example, the lack of state purpose. Unlike working royals, the Sussexes do not represent the British government or national interests, which critics argue makes these trips pointless exercises in self-promotion rather than impactful diplomacy. And that point is only driven home by the fact that Meghan and Harry curated the image of these trips with their own photographers and whatnot onto their website in what is unmistakably a marketing campaign for Harry and Meghan, philanthropists for hire. The public reaction, though, was so polarizing, it really squashed their marketing efforts. The perception of cosplaying royal tours while avoiding royal duties has led to significant backlash and, for example, the petition in Australia. This will hinder the long-term sustainability of this sort of model. Archewell's financial viability is also under scrutiny. The 2025 collapse and restructuring amid legal and financial scrutiny raises questions about their ability to deliver tangible support beyond symbolic gestures during these trips, and people in cost of living crises around the world with so much serious, heavy stuff in the news all the time really don't have the tolerance for and are looking more critically at symbolic roles anywhere. And this leaves the Sussexes with a rather uncomfortable question. Can they survive and, perhaps more importantly, continue to grow Archwell under just these two models, since their illusions of sponsored tours didn't work out? These really are the only two viable options they have left, considering their financial state. Here's the numbers. Despite a $2.5 million financial deficit in late 2025, tax filings show the organization still holds over $8 million in assets. Experts estimate this reserve allows them to operate for approximately 3 more years at current spending levels without any new major donations. So it kind of makes sense that they're trying to find ways to sort of cost share these sorts of trips and efforts, because they still need the publicity. They still need the reputation of at least twice a year doing something really big that can be classified as humanitarian, philanthropic, charitable. They have to do at least a couple of big things each year, and then they have a sprinkling of smaller things. So they need these types of pictures. They need this type of publicity. But the way they've set up this Australia trip, as I've said before, any income they make while they're in Australia, they can deduct the cost of the travel to and from, even though they did this self-serving media campaign of these pointless awareness visits to charities. They can still deduct the travel of the trip and a lot of expenses involved in the trip from that income and then be taxed on what's left. So they can reduce their tax bill massively by doing it this way. But really, the biggest impact is when it comes to public opinion. The decision to effectively monetize philanthropic trips creates a stark dichotomy in public reception. The grifter narrative sticks. Critics and even a lot of media have labeled this hybrid model a money-spinning commercial engagement that uses charities as a soft backdrop for business. There's also credibility erosion at play. Transparency issues continue to haunt the Sussexes and their brands. Independent watchdog Charity Watch currently gives Archwell a question mark rating because there's not enough data, citing their repeated failure to provide audited financial statements to be rated. When we combine that with the empty and vacuous self-promoting awareness visits rather than any sort of tangible aid, it only makes the situation worse. Although this ambassadorship and hybrid model might get them by for a little longer and stretch that 3-year estimate to maybe 5 years by reducing spending and cost sharing and things of that nature, the credibility gap is growing. People can see. People are more savvy to these things. And as I said, with our own cost of living crises going on and all sorts of really serious stuff happening, if you're not delivering real value, people notice, and they're increasingly not willing to let these celebrities slide. But leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again soon. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.